Okay,
Yeah.
hello everyone, welcome. This is Pluriversal Design Perspectives from Ainu Mosir. I am Xanat Vargas Meza from the Research and Development Center for Digital Nature in the University of Tsukuba in Japan. Welcome to Ainu Mosir. So I would like to discuss the following points, and at the end of the presentation, we will have some 12 minutes for questions and comments. So you can ask questions at any time. We will check them once the presentation ends. You can ask the question directly to me if you want to remain anonymous, or it can be open. And please leave the contact details in case we cannot address all of the questions at the end of the session. So this research is heavily related to indigenous peoples, which means that it involves specific types of knowledge, including multiple senses, values, questions, language. It is empowering and it tends to transform the researcher. The general objective is to analyze interactive projects related to indigenous peoples in Japan. Well, the analysis method started from the origin, which is myself and the people involved. So I had to ask myself, where do the perspectives of the Ainu peoples and my perspective coincide? So this is the universe. This is one of the representations of the universe by the indigenous peoples of my country. Keep in mind that this is quite complex, so I am going to summarize it a lot. But we believe that the universe starts in the center. It has 4 directions, and that everything exists in the universe, including our thoughts and beliefs. So we call this cosmovision in my country, cosmovision. How do we see or how do we perceive with our senses the world around us? Ainu people have a similar concept for the universe, but again, keep in mind that it's more complex than this. I'm summarizing it quite a lot. Ainu Mosir is not only the real geographical space, but also their beliefs, thoughts, and activities. Many Ainu people have reported that they carry Ainu Mosir with them wherever they go. So this is a map of my country. I want you to please listen carefully to the following text by Tzetzal and Tzotzil indigenous peoples from there. They are located around here. Many words are walked in the world. Many words are made. Many words make us. There are worlds made of that are lies and injustices, and there are worlds that are true and truthful. We are made by true words. In the worlds of the powerful, there is no room, but only for the great and their servants. But there is room for everyone in the world we want. The world we want is one where many worlds fit. So that last sentence was an inspiration for a person called Arturo Escobar, a Colombian American anthropologist who has been compiling indigenous thoughts from several countries. He combined this with Western currents of thought, mostly Foucault, and he has coordinated design projects based on these thoughts, summarizing them in a book called Designs for the Pluriverse. This is where the idea of the pluriversal design comes from. So how do a pluriversal design looks like? Not because this is a quite recent concept, there are not many examples, but we have the Espacio Transiciones by Escobar, which is a place, a physical place where designers and design students from diverse backgrounds can come together and create. From my thesis also we have Look Ecody, which is an application based on the YouTube API combined with a psychological intervention. The objective was to teach designers and design students about sustainable design according to their level of interest and their feelings. The idea of this application is that you can use it without a YouTube account, and it does not store any information about you. So it will recommend ideas from YouTube according to your specific needs. What we could discern at the end of the study was that the people got more interested and learned more about sustainable design thanks to the application and the psychological intervention, in contrast with using just YouTube. Another example of a pluriversal design is Malacate, Taller Experimental Textil, from my country. Here, this is compilation by Albarrán González. In her thesis, she analyzed again the universe, the concept of the universe by our peoples, but apply it to how the design interacts with the design object and with other social actors, the environment. And well, the purpose of this atelier is to research traditional patterns and traditional textile methods from our country to apply them for new products. And they also use geolocation technologies to document plagiarizing cases, because it's very common, unfortunately, for traditional indigenous patterns to be plagiarized by other brands. Therefore, taking into account what is pluriversal design, I have two layers of methods to analyze Ainu multimedia. One layer is inspired in designer holistic integration, which is something that I started working on during my thesis. And it's based on the Nawa symbol for Olin. This is one of the representations of the symbol of Olin. It means perpetual movement. So therefore, the designer has to conciliate individual objectivity and subjectivity. The designer interacts with human society and also with non-human nature. And this interaction is always changing. It's always in perpetual movement. I also took the base of the spiral because it's a very common symbol among indigenous communities in my country. And it also happens to be very common among Ainu. Ainu call the spiral moriu. The second layer for this analysis is based on my operationalization of the pluriversal design, divided in knowledge, not necessarily acquired through official institutions, artisanal in terms of augmented, extended tools, plural because it embodies the many voices it serves, abundant because it fosters diversity, and communal because the communities are at the center of its governance. So now we can start analyzing the case of the Ainu interactive designs. I look for a very specific place in Hokkaido, signaled here in the red pointer. It's called Akan. It's localized in a national park. So it is heavily monitored by the government and also by the environmental associations. And many of the residents of these communities are involved with environmental conservation activities. This is part of the Akan Ainu Kotan, the village. And we can see here the influence with other indigenous communities interactions. These totems were made by Tokonoburi, and they are inspired on Canadian totems, but they also have typical Ainu important symbols like the bear and like the owl, and also a stylized figure. This stylized figure is a Ainu indigenous woman in her regalia. And also this village has many traditional elements. For example, it is considered that the owls protect the village. That is why you can find them all over the place. The interactions between the economical part, the environment, and the society can be also seen in other places of the village. We can see here in the background of the picture, there are 5-star hotels, and this path leads us to the Ainu Kotan, the Ainu village. And it functions like an open-air museum where you can see the traditional crafts that are made there, and there is enough place to sit all over the village, and also by night is very well lit, so the spaces can be used and are user-friendly as much as possible. And for example, the inside of the stores, we have the Café Porono in the Ainu Kotan that has a lot of details of Ainu traditional elements like the tonkori, the traditional instrument, but also here and there you can also notice tiny objects that are from other indigenous peoples or other countries. And in this part, we can see a French-style bakery that has inao. Inao is an element used for Ainu traditional ceremonies. Next, we have the people. So one thing that I found interesting is in our country, we have the concept of mestizo for people who are partly indigenous. I myself, I'm mestiza. But in the case of Ainu peoples, there is no concept of mestizo. You are considered as Ainu if you self-identify as Ainu, if you are adopted in an Ainu family, if you are married into an Ainu family, or if an Ainu association considers you an Ainu person. So many of the people in Akan, some of them were not born in Akan, and some others are from other different Ainu communities in Hokkaido. And also, many of them have been mobile. They have been working in other places in Japan before going back to Akan or migrating to Akan. So this also gives them a multifaceted perspective on design. And in particular, this is from a web page called Akan Ainu Arts and Crafts Next, where they are documenting part of their design process in a very interesting way. It is actually based on portions of this documentation, and also documentation made by other actors involved with these interactive experiences that I have been constructing the design process through which these experiences came to become a reality. The first experience is called Akanyu Carlos Kamui. It is project mapping combined with traditional Ainu dance. So here the questions were basically where the questions I wanted to find out more about were how was Los Kamui developed? Why was it developed? How respectful is it to Ainu people? How respectful is it to the environment, and how sustainable is it? So this initiative was born from Ainu people. And part of the Ainu people from Akan, they manage the Icor Theater Union, which is the building is owned by the Kushiro city, meaning that this is a governmental building. And it's partly also the management is aided by an NPO. We also have a Kanko Tourism Co., which is enterprise that manages the tourist-related aspects of Akan. So through Akan Tourism Co., the Ainu peoples receive a national funding to promote tourism in their area. And that is how they could finance the project for Los Kamui. Also, Ainu peoples had contact with a company that used project mapping technology called Prism Productions. And when they knew that they were interested in using the technology, they contacted the WOW enterprises and helped also contact other Japanese creatives. From the side of Ainu peoples, there were other Ainu creatives outside Akan involved with this project, mostly related to the garments. And although they are not related to this project directly, WOW also consulted a researcher in Sapporo University regarding Ainu culture, and Hokkaido University has a satellite office in the Icor Theater. So although they are not closely related to this, I thought it was important to mention that there are some researchers involved with the community. So to summarize, this project was conceived to attract young public to the Icor Theater. They created a new story based on the disappearance of the Hokkaido wolf, called Horkyu by Ainu people. And it looks like Ainu people recovered their pride through this experience. The story is environmentalist in principle, and under my appreciation, it looks like having human performers reinforces the effectivity of the environmental message. In some media coverage, there are reports of people that say that they have felt that something changed inside after having this experience. And also that they have become more interested or suddenly interested in the Ainu culture as well. That this has been a door to becoming interested in Ainu culture. It is proving to be sustainable. You know that regarding coronavirus, tourist-related activities have been heavily impacted. So the season for Los Kamui was shortened, but after adapting a couple of things and following health recommendations, they were able to continue with this experience, and the public in the Icor Theater has been increasing considerably. Next, we have Kamui Lumina. So I tried to use the same questions. In this case, the initiative was by Moment Factory and Panasonic enterprises in Japan. They were interested in creating an experience in Akan using a technology developed by Panasonic. So they contacted Akan Tourism Co., who had the national funding, and in turn they contacted the Akan Ainu Industrial Association. So after arranging some things, the Moment Factory Canada was engaged, because Moment Factory is a global level media company. So they have several branches around the world. And hence a team flew to Hokkaido to meet the Ainu people, and in order to co-create this experience. And also the Environment Agency from the government was carefully monitoring that the park was not impacted in terms of the environment. Therefore, this experience was initiated by enterprises, and it was conceived to attract tourism in general. It adapts an Ainu legend provided by an elder woman the Ainu legend is about an owl that is seeking a messenger to send to the human world, because it appears that the animals and other creatures are disappearing from the world. So, as you know, the owl is a very important element in and a very important animal for Ainu people. So it's somehow like a god, and hence he seeks a helper to send a message to humans, and that is the whole idea of the adventure, that the people receive a staff with most of the technology contained on it to interact with the forest by night. So the Canadian production has worked with indigenous peoples before and experiences online with environmental guidelines in Japan. However, because of certain technological constraints, and also it looks like also logistical constraints, it was not possible to run it for 1 year. So how does these experiences compare to other indigenous digital experiences in the world? In Canada, for example, there is an organization studying and moderating indigenous related media led by indigenous people, and they also have their own media arts festival. There was actually a similar experience in this year in Akan. They created an online festival, although this was more focused on music and on performance. But it's kind of somewhat similar, in a similar fashion. Also because Kamui Lumina has some similarities with video games. I thought it was interesting to see whether else in the world there were some indigenous games made by people. So there are quite a lot in US and Canada. There is also, some of them are set in the future, some are under development too, and they are also set in the future. And regarding project mapping, there are many examples in Australia. This is just one. Pueblo pottery in US and VR futures in the US are also other interesting examples. In the case of my country, we have had filmmaking by indigenous people since the 80s. And thanks to these initiatives now, international film festivals include indigenous segments. Because there has been heavy investment in multimedia education by filmmakers and companies since 2 decades ago, our internal multimedia industry, gaming industry, is booming. And as a byproduct, indigenous film and creation with indigenous people is booming. Like, for example, with the video game Mulaka and with the 68 Voices animations, just to cite some examples. So here in Japan, there are many other examples I can cite, but particularly in the community of Akan, we have Los Kamui projection mapping, Kamui Lumina interactive experience, the film Ainu Mosir, and the Akan Yukarhi no Kamui no Shi, which was developed with the same creative network that created Akan Yukar Los Kamui. So we can notice how that network was quite complex, was quite messy, even visually expressing it visually, but it has proven to be a sustained and fruitful cooperation. So in conclusion, I am relating this to my method of the Kapak paradigm. I noticed some lacking characteristics in Kamui Lumina. This doesn't mean that they are absent, just that they are a little bit lacking, and this creates room for new opportunities and improvements for future projects. In consideration with other indigenous multimedia projects, we see that when the communities, the indigenous communities, are not central to the project, there are some representation issues. We also need more detailed records of production processes of indigenous media, and I think the Akan example is giving us something to note for other indigenous people to take notice around the world, how they are starting to also reflect on why we are doing this, how we are doing it, and also multiple facets, multiple individuals reflecting on the same project. Ainu media does not explore future scenarios yet, but again, this is also a possibility for the future. And regarding, this is another way to see culture, because as I have mentioned it in my methodology, we are always in perpetual movement. So as you say, Taka would say, regarding heritage and culture, I always say that they have thick roots, a trunk, and spreading leaves. What we are doing is making new leaves. We are trying new things, just like new leaves grow every year, but nothing is possible without solid roots and a stone trunk. Iyaira Ikeri, Tlazokamati, thank you. Gracias, arigatou gozaimasu. So now I am opening it to questions around things like credit, revenue streams for these programs. Yeah, that is also very interesting. So to summarize, I could say that the project of Los Camus is the one that is more economically viable for Ainu people. The other one has more complex implications with the enterprises. That is a short answer to your question. That is why also the Los Camus related network is also more convenient for all of the actors involved. I don't know if you want to add something else. Okay, any other question or comment? I think I talked it very fast. I was calculating I was going to finish with 15 minutes.
No, I was, well, firstly, I just wanted to say thank you for that talk. You know, it was really interesting. There's a lot of stuff obviously in this, and I think just personally speaking, there's a lot of things out which is way outside of my experience and knowledge. So kind of part of what I'm sort of looking at when I'm thinking about it is, I guess the things that sort of stand out to me were just the sort of the kind of ownership of projects, the sort of the, you know, as obviously kind of a key thing, how much those projects are like driven by, say, the Ainu people themselves, how much they kind of, I suppose they use an aesthetic and channels that are, I guess, just in a very broad term, sort of more Western culture, sort of, you know, channels, for example. So it's kind of a lot to think about in that. I don't know if you had any sort of comments on how much those projects, you know, fit with these kind of channels that are not the natural channels of Ainu people, for example, in terms of, you know, how much it's adapting to what other people, how they might consume media or how they might interact. I guess that's the sort of thing I was thinking about.
Ownership is such a big topic because in the case of Camus Illumina, for example, the original story was completely theirs. It was a story from the location. In the case of Los Camus, you can say it's also theirs because they conceived it together. It's new, it's true. And if we go to very rigid terms of what is traditional and what is not, then you can say, oh, this is not traditional Ainu culture. But they were the ones that created this, based on what the experience of losing one of the animal species in Hokkaido, and also based on human and animal migration, things that have happened to them and things that they are looking at happening around them. So that is also one part of what belongs to Ainu people, what belongs to all of us, or what we share in common with them. Because the part of migration, for example, has a lot of implications for peoples in my own country, for example.
Okay, I have another question. I hope you don't mind me just coming up with these random questions. Another question, you mentioned things like sort of future, exploring the future scenarios. I think that's a really interesting topic. And it's particularly strong topic when you're looking at something where, like you mentioned before, there's a strong roots, a strong trunk. So there's already some rooting of that actually provides a way of exploring the future and a kind of a basis for exploring the future. I mean, have you seen, because I'm just trying to think of other general projects about that. So I mean, just in a very broad sense and unrelated to this, I think about things like sort of Afrofuturism and kind of, that sort of thing. I mean, have you seen other projects where there are other indigenous people exploring the future based on their own kind of culture and history?
Yeah, indeed. And something that it comes again and again in terms of Ainu design, not only the interactive design, but also in other types of design that we are researching here, is that they always adapt to current needs. It's always changing. It's always, as I mentioned before, in perpetual movement. So they themselves have asked, what is traditional? They themselves come up with this type of questions. This is not something that I made up. They already have mentioned it again and again, several of them. That opens the door for so many possibilities. I am sure that many in the audience are familiar with transition design. So these kind of things can also be explored together.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you mentioned transition design, because that's obviously the idea of using these kind of sort of cultural experience and history to sort of explore the future as well. I think that's quite interesting to see how that works. But again, I think it's a real, I think this kind of work is really difficult just from my point of view. Like I said, I don't know a huge amount about it, but the idea of kind of how projects become shaped and determined by the people at the center of them is always a really tricky thing.
Yeah.
And I guess also that expectation that they should be is also a kind of outsider's expectation as well, in a sense, So I find there's layers of difficulty in it when I look at those projects.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I would like to ask another question.
Sure.
And you kind of touched on some of it already, and one of Simon's questions was kind of around this idea of ownership. And I'm just really, you mentioned kind of economic viability, but I'm really curious about how, like what kinds of conversations and protocols were kind of put in place and happening before these projects started to kind of ensure that the indigenous communities were actually, I don't know, being paid for this output or getting the credit that they deserve, or is there IP involved, or how do these things work when, I guess, like Simon was saying, like these two cultures, I guess, kind of clash, right? Because I guess they're very different ideas around what that means in different cultures.
So in regards to Como Illumina, I am not fully aware of what happened there, because it's quite, how to say it, there are several languages and several branch offices involved in that one. In the case of Los Camuy, I know that the treatment was a little bit more, the network was even less hierarchical, let's call it like that. The companies involved were Japanese, therefore the language, the communication between them. Ainu people do have Ainu language, but it's not widely used. Actually, they are pushing these recent years to promote the language education, the Ainu language education, precisely because it's not so common even among Ainu peoples. But that advantage was there, that the original language was the same one. They could converse in more egalitarian terms. So they actually, there was actually good chemistry in those networks. So that facilitated these decisions of who owns what and etc. Basically, Los Camuy belongs to the Ainu, and they can do whatever they can do with it. And that is why also they are continuing to making projects with this same network. The interest of the other of the Camuy Lumina enterprises was just to make one project. That is the idea. They actually have other projects here in Japan, one in Osaka Castle and another in a private island at the southern zone. I don't remember, Mishima Island, something like that. So the objective was really just that, and that's it. There is continuous maintenance of the equipment and that kind of thing, but yeah, the level of cooperation is completely different. You can notice it even in the network figure.
Cool, thank you. I was also wondering, is there any way to, because you said they were experiences, is there any way to kind of see them, or is there any online?
There are a lot of, if you look up online Camuy Lumina, I think in the presentation I also shared, let me share it again, the web pages.
Yeah, because it looks so interesting. I'd love to have a look at it.
So it's Camuy Lumina.
Okay,
Lumina. They all, also something is that they adapt quite well to, because they are heavily related to tourism. So they have English and Chinese translations for the web pages usually. So this one is a Ainu next, but the Los Camuy page. Ainu Los Camuy. If you look at it with the name, it will pop out. Akanyu Carlos Camuy. They do have their own web pages. I think in terms of graphics, because I am more experienced in multimedia and web design, like designing for the desktop and that kind of thing, I have found that the quality of their websites is quite good in general.
Thank you so much.
Just another quick question. We have a few minutes left, but I mean, I've heard about pluriversal design, and it's something that I've not yet had a chance to properly really look into. So I just wondered if, just very quickly, there's any kind of good reading material or resources around that we be able to look at and maybe share also with the community through this.
Yeah, the book by, again, I will share my screen again. The Science for the Pluriverse by Arturo Escobar. That is the beginning of it. However, I would recommend that if you can read texts in Spanish, Arturo Escobar is much more, how to say it, he really explores many other aspects of design in other previous papers that he has written in Spanish. And if you research on the keywords he uses, he has taken a lot of those things from indigenous communities, not only from my country, but from Peru, for example, buen vivir, sentir pensar, those kinds of concepts that come from Latin American epistemologies. So it's a very rich universe, and there is not just one pluriverse. It's completely. There are so many aspects of it.
Thank you. No, I mean, I think that's, yeah, it's really interesting. It's very relevant. One of the talks that we were having at the end of yesterday was about the sort of the political economy, which is like the whole framework around design that shapes it and guides it and determines what gets made and what gets done. So there's kind of completely different perspectives coming from completely different sources and backgrounds and histories on it, I think is a nice complement to thinking about that. So I think it's something really good to explore. Also really keen to put up resources that are in different languages, like in Spanish, for example, because I think that's quite good, especially if you think that the concepts explored in some of those are better or different perspectives in say the book, the Pluriversal book as well. So it'd be nice to find some of those. And I might ask you after the session if you recommend any particular ones.
And also, I forgot, but also her thesis is so good. It came after my own thesis. Where is her? Albarrán González. Albarrán González. She also writes in English. She's from Mexico too. But her thesis was super good. So I also recommend to read that one too.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a lot of really good stuff there. So yeah,
So,
no, I just want to say thank you as well. So.
Yeah, and just one announcement. I will also give a lecture on Ainu design, particularly focused on visual and textile design next week, if you want to come. And thank you very much to everyone. I hope you got new ideas from this.